All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast Caroline Carruthers. She is the CEO of Carruthers and Jackson, but very excited to talk to Caroline today about AI strategy. I think a topic that will resonate very well with our audience today. But before we jump into the questions, Caroline, thank you so much for talking with me today. How are you doing?
I am doing absolutely brilliant, and thanks for having me, Andrew. It's really lovely to talk to you.
Yes, likewise. And I always like to start with a brief bio for my guests so my audience members might be able to get to know them a little bit better. So
Mhm.
would you mind maybe sharing a little bit about your experience and how, maybe you ended up with teaching at TDWI even?
Happily. I have been in the past a CIO, a CTO. I was one of the first CDOs, definitely one of the first female CDOs. And now I'm a chief exec. So I feel like I'm just collecting chief titles like other people collect cards now. So maybe that needs to be a different hobby that I come up with. So I have quite varied experience in this kind of space. I think it comes down to I just can't say no very well because I'm always like, oh, that looks like a nice problem to solve. So let's go and do that. So I'd love to pretend that there's more strategy behind my career other than, oh, that's interesting, let's go and do it. But as a result of that, I think I've been involved in some fantastic projects. I've been involved in some really interesting spaces. So, one of the places I've been chief data officer for was for the Network Rail in the UK, which runs the rail network. And that's fascinating because you're in a space where, for instance, you need to be looking after your critical data, so you can't send a train down the same line of trains down because you could hurt people, and that's probably not a good thing to be doing.
Kidding.
But you're also dealing with how many tea bags do you have on a train as well? So you've had that full spectrum and gambit to deal with. And when anybody ever moans about historical data, I always go back to at Network Rail, I had Latin scrolls in a cave. So I would argue with anybody to try and beat that kind of legacy.
Well, and obviously a very important position as well. I mean, like I've visited the UK several times, luckily enough, and the it seems like the entire country runs on trains. So a vital role. And thank you very much for sharing your experience. And that's a major reason why we're interested very much in talking with you today is because you have a vast knowledge base and experience. So thank you for that. So we are going to discuss building an AI strategy a little bit. I don't want to step on the toes of the course that you're going to be speaking to, but would love to hear your thoughts on what actually is an AI strategy and why you think it's very important for folks to have one in this day and age.
Well, I don't think you can talk to any organization now and not mention the AI word. Well, acronym, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So, artificial intelligence. We are so interested in it, and I can see the reason why. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool, but I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about what AI is, what it can do, what it can currently do, and the potential that it offers organizations. So I think it's really important that we spend time now getting our head around what is it? Is it right? Because I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's the right thing for every organization to do. But if it is right, why we have to get a hold of it and decide so it doesn't just come and wash over us.
Right. And I think that that can be kind of an overwhelming thing for many organizations, right? You see a brand new technology, it's offering a lot of capabilities, and you
Mm.
just want to kind of rush to it and see what without really starting from the beginning, maybe is where I'm going to ask you to go back to. I'm assuming the strategy component is what you would recommend for folks to start with before just going and making any
Absolutely.
sort of purchases or changing, what you're doing on a daily basis.
Absolutely, because when I talk about strategy, what I've really got in my mind is I use the idea of purpose an awful lot. So, what is the purpose that you're going to use this technology for? And what are you hoping to get out of it? So, what does good look like for you? What is a win? Now, I don't think you need to overcomplicate strategies. I think that's one thing that we do. We get tempted to either try and solve world peace or boil the ocean. And it's really important to decide, you are going to make a decision and that's the way you're going to tackle it, but you do it with purpose. And I
Hmm.
think that has to be the starting point.
Right. And this kind of leads me to my next question here. We've had podcast webinars, content from TDWI around a data strategy, generally speaking, a larger data strategy. Does, in your mind, an AI strategy fit within that, or is that something maybe that's on the side running in congruency?
So I'm going to give a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but just bear with me for a second. So I'm not really a purist when it comes to we have to have a technology strategy, we have to have a data strategy, we have to have an AI strategy. All I genuinely care about is that we understand how all of this fits together and how we're going to make it work. So for some organizations, because of the way they work, it makes perfect sense to have a data strategy and an AI strategy because basically data is the fuel that's going into the AI and you need to know how they work together. In other organizations, you might have a digital strategy that encompasses these kind of different things. So I wouldn't be arguing about it has to be this, has to be. I'm more interested in what it's doing for you. And everything that we're going to talk about with TDWI and the course that I'm going to take everybody through, you can use that and it could be a component as part of a strategy, or it could be the strategy. And I think it's important to build that flexibility into your
Mhm.
thinking when you go through this kind of process.
I would fully agree with that. And I have to ask now, based on that, maybe can you share some high level steps for getting started with this data strategy, excuse me, AI strategy? I flubbed that one based on that conversation there. But yeah, can we get some tips, best practices, maybe, if you will, on getting started?
Absolutely. So again, it won't come as a surprise to you based on what we've just talked about, but you start with a purpose. So what do you want to get out of it? What problems are you going to solve? What opportunities are you looking to try and break down and make advantage for you? But also, really important step that we often miss out is what are we not going to focus on? Because often it's, oh, we're going to do all this, and we miss that part out, so we don't quite know where the boundaries are. So that's a good starting point. And then what are the metrics that's going to demonstrate to you that that's working? And that's the starting point. As well as that, I'm going to kind of jump to the other end of the scale is where are you now? Because with any kind of strategy, I think when you're building it, you're starting from where are we now? Where are we trying to get to? And the strategy is the really interesting bit that gets you from one to the other. So that's the way I would encompass how I'm trying to create the strategy.
Hmm. No, and that obviously makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, when you're engaged in conversations with companies, the evaluation process must be, a relatively long process, I'm assuming. Can you take us through what that would look like, that initial conversation?
And normally what we start with is we start with a maturity assessment. So
Hmm.
tend to focus around the data maturity to start with, because again, as I mentioned, that is the fuel that's going into the AI. So we need to understand that picture because quite frankly, there's a lot of organizations out there who, let's just say their data is not in the best space. So I would use the phrase garbage in, garbage out. And I think it's one of those perfect examples of if you've got complete and utter garbage, you might want to fix some of this before you do that. Now, when I say that, I would also caveat it with that doesn't mean you can't start working with AI. I think that it's important to experiment a little bit with AI to understand how it fits in your organization. So what types of AI would work for you? And is there smaller problems that you can think of with a proof of concept or something that would start over here while you're still doing the maturity assessment? My idea really is that you can't boil the ocean, but what you should be starting to do is dip your toe in the water and see what it's like for you.
Hmm. Hmm. Very good. So then I guess the next question I have is more around structure. And obviously I'm assuming this will be very much a case by case basis, but uh, generally speaking, who should be in charge of handling this AI strategy as it's being developed, or at least thought through, and then implementation?
Um, it's a slightly glib answer, but the person that cares the most in most organizations, because there is a level of excitement that goes with this, which is fantastic. But there's also a level of tenacity and resilience
Mm.
if you're going to actually follow through with this. So you need a little bit of that passion to keep you going on that journey because you can clearly see what it is. Um, I come back to what I said about I don't care what the strategy is called. If it's the CTO or the CIO or the CDO, or as long as there is one clear owner of I am going to drive this through, I'm going to make this happen, and I'm going to do it for the whole organization's betterment, that's what we'd start and focus on.
Sounds like
'Cause
we might be inventing a chief AI officer title to add to your list of chiefs that you went through there. Would that be something that organizations are, potentially adding to their roster?
I find the C-suite really fascinating. So we did a bunch of research many years ago now around because um, obviously some titles get really popular and then they come into being and then they fade away a little bit and others pop into it. So there's a little bit of a trend goes around
Hmm.
uh, chief boards. What we found from our research, which I find interesting, is, I mean, if sorry to jump around a little bit, but can you remember at one point in time, a chief finance officer was not a permanent member of the board? So that didn't come into being till about the 60s. I mean, now it would be ludicrous for anybody to not have a CFO in a large organization. You can't imagine it. But in that vein, we found that the C-suite roles that achieved longevity were the ones that were based around a corporate asset. So finance being a perfect example, because if you have that asset, then you need someone who's thinking about how to use that asset for the whole organization, not just for a particular department, but across the whole piece. So CFO, anything around people, so HR would be another C-suite that they've stayed. And we've seen examples of some C-suite that have maybe come and gone. So digital is one that kind of
Hmm.
got really trendy for a while and passed. I promise I'm getting to the point here. So when you have a corporate asset around technology, so you've probably got a CIO or a CTO, depending on that one. And again, that one has achieved longevity. We're seeing the same kind of thing come to place with the chief data officer because, again, it is a corporate asset. We now recognize it's a corporate asset. So those roles are kind of being baked in. Genuinely, I know there's different variants of CDIO or CDAO, or,
Hmm.
we're just playing word soup a little bit at the moment. But again, it's the aim of what those roles are there for. When it comes to AI for me is a combination of the technology and the data because it's a tool that you're using to do all of that. So realistically, one of those two people on your board should already be able to pick that strategy up for you.
Very good. Yeah,
I
and
feel like that was a very long-winded answer. I'm really sorry, but hopefully that got the point across.
not at all. I think it's very interesting too. I mean, you made some very, very valid points about like the semantics that each organization, so like a CDIO and all those things are very interesting, but it is also very different for many organizations out there. They all have their different, ways of naming those positions. So thanks for taking us through that. Okay, so I got one last question for you before I let you go. Um, Obviously, as discussed, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of hype in this area.
Mm.
I'm curious, and maybe you might have already answered this one given the purpose question, but maybe you can expound upon that. When organizations are moving forward with a strategy, AI strategy, what are you seeing the pitfalls, some of the challenges outside of the purpose one that you've already mentioned?
So one of the interesting challenges that I think we're facing at the moment is that Gen AI is the most popular hype that's going
Mm,
around at the moment. And I would describe it that it's a bit like if you only have a hammer, you can't build a house because there are more things, more tools needed to build a
hmm.
house than just a hammer. And at the moment, we're falling a little bit into everybody's got a Gen AI hammer. So every solution looks like this is the one that you have to use. There are multiple types of AI out there, some of which much more interesting to me. It's just that one's caught the public interest. So that's one of the pitfalls of that. Are you trying to talk about Gen AI? Are you talking about AI? And
Mm.
can get that piece across first? So I think that would be one of the first things I would look at.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very true. Generative AI has captured the imagination of,
Hmm,
I mean, for decades, really. I mean, it goes back to science fiction novels and movies. So it's not
absolutely.
shocking that that people are fascinated with it as it's entering kind of more the real life, everyday space.
And it's solving simple real world problems for it. And I find it fascinating because the really interesting stuff isn't necessarily on Gen AI coming from the likes of the data practitioners. It's people who've suddenly got a tool in their hand and go, oh, I can solve a personal problem with it. For anybody out there who has a child, I have a 20-year-old son, and I say this with all love, but my son is a little bit of intelligent moron. So how he gets through life at times, I really do struggle. But him and his friends are all the same, and they're using it as almost a little personal assistant because they're terrible at getting together. They've figured out how to use it, so they just, where is Kai Freeword? And it arranges them. They're getting together so much more than they used to before because they're using a tool in a way I wouldn't have used it.
That's so funny. And I do love that descriptor. I feel like had my parents known that, they may have also called me that at a certain point in my life. But it is an interesting piece. And I think, I know we're Gen AI again is kind of grabbing a hold of our conversation
Mm,
here. But, I do want to ask a question, specific to like the co-pilot environment
mm.
as we close here. Is there facets that you're excited about from a data practitioner's point of view?
Absolutely, because I think there is a tremendous amount of potential there. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm excited about some of the Gen AI stuff around the Copilot as well. That can be really fascinating. However, um, there's a note of caution for anybody who deals in a regulatory industry or anything that's with strict legislation. Gen AI is not something I would really want on my plate if I had to describe how I'd made a decision. However, some of the core pilot stuff around did you know X, Y, and Z and giving you access at the right point in time to a specific piece of information could be a game changer in how we can make decisions.
Mm, yeah.
That kind of stuff I could see being fascinating going forward.
Fully agree with that. I'm very much looking forward to, all of the different advancements and in all the different facets as well, not just,
Mhm.
on our phones and being able to order food faster or what have you. But, across the entire industry, it seems like, artificial intelligence, not just Gen AI, will be a huge factor.
I like to think about it more around augmented intelligence because
Mm,
it's what it can do for us. It's how, if I like to imagine it in my head of this AI being a giant mountain that we can stand on top of so we can see further and we can do more when we can see more capability around us. That's the way I'd like it to be, and that's the way I think we should be focusing on when we're building these type of strategies. How do we enable that kind of stuff? Because it isn't about replacing the human decision-making process. We're quite good at a lot of things. I think we forget that sometimes. We are quite good at a lot of things. So how do we just be us but better?
mm. Well, that's a great note to end it on right there. Caroline, thank you so much for your time today. And for all the folks out there listening, I'll just reiterate, you can check out Caroline's course on our virtual summit, Building an AI Strategy for Real Business Impact on April 17th. I will go ahead and put a link to the description of that course. Please go ahead and register if you have some time. But it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Caroline, today. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.